Hello everyone, so welcome to this section, and what we're covering this week is we're looking at resources and images. Okay, so what we're going to look at is this ability to bring in an image feature and the ability to associate an image with our placemark object in our case study. So we've broken it down into the following sections. We initially just have a kind of a general discussion on resources and how they kind of fit into the overall makeup of an Android app. We'll then look at our model updates, which is bringing in that kind of edit feature, and there's some extra bits of code you'll have to add in there yourselves, and that'll be tied to the lab as well. And then finally, we look at images, where first of all we kind of look at the SAF for the storage access framework, and then we look at what that framework gives us to make things easier for the developer to be able to kind of access images on the device through the gallery and through there's a UI picker that's quite nice. And then we bring all that together finally in the lab to take you through then the ability to have an extra feature where we can add an image, and when the user clicks on add image, they'll be presented with a UI picker where the user will select an image, and then that image will be associated with the place mark, which is then stored in the model and presented then in the list that we're initially kind of working with. Okay, so other than that, I'll just hand you over now to that first section, which is dealing with hello everyone, and welcome to today's section. So we're going to look at resources today. Now we haven't really we've been using them from the start of our kind of the module when we started working with Android, but we haven't really looked and talked about them in any great detail, and you may have kind of hit a few errors along the way in terms of working with resources, so it can help understanding how resources fit into the overall project. Okay, so today what we're going to look at is a little bit of overview about resources in general. We'll then look at resources and how we use them specifically in placemark, and then we'll talk a little bit about resources and Android Studio and the R class, so where physically you could actually find that R class. So we'll just continue on there. It's quite a short section, so it won't be too long. So the official kind of documentation tells us that resources are the additional files and static content that your code uses, such as bitmaps, layout definitions, user interface strings, animation instructions, and a lot more on top of that. Excuse me. You should always externalize app resources such as images and strings from your code so that you can maintain them independently. Once you externalize your app resources, you can access them using resource IDs that are generated in your project's R class. So again, we would have been looking at this R dot ID dot whatever. So when you wanted to access individual kind of widgets sitting on your layout, you would access them that way. Similarly, your R dot string, you can have our current menu options as well would have been done through that R reference. You would have done your R dot layout, another common one as well. So if we look at it in our own kind of project, right? So these are the resources we're kind of working with already. So we have our drawable resources, which are XML. Here's our layouts. There's our menu. I've kind of collapsed down those bitmaps, and we have our values, colors and strings there specifically, and then there's the themes. We have modified the themes a little bit, but not too much. But it is useful to know, as I say, where resources fit in specifically into the structure of your project. Okay, so if we look at it in our exercises and within placemark itself, to begin with, we would have hard coded in some values. And again, if you think about it, when you have if you hard code anything into your application, and if it happens to be used again, there's a lot of extra work that has to be done to go in and make those changes. So that's when we talk about externalizing these resources, especially with images and what have you, and strings. It makes a lot more sense to put those in separate files, in our case separate resources, so that we only need to change them the once. So one of the exercises was dealing with string resources inside our placemark. So we would have kind of hard coded in this please enter a title. So ideally what we should do is externalize that, put it in its own strings .xml, its own resource file, and reference it then through its ID in that particular line of code. Okay, so as the exercise says there, these strings should be in the strings.xml resource file. Okay, so what we would have done was something like this. So we would have had our initial in our placemark activity, we would make the change like so. You can see it there. We would also, if we want to, setting text, we can reference it like so here, and note it's r.string. So again, the R class, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in a few moments. It is basically every resource that you have in your application. Hang on now, sorry about that. All right, every resource that you have in your application will be referenced in this single file. So every time you add a new resource and you build your project, a new ID will be generated for that and stored within the project. But luckily for us, we can refer to it through the R class, through the type of resource that it is. Again, we have r.layouts, r.strings are quite common, and then the name of the resource that we gave it within the particular XML file itself. So in this example here, right, there's a couple of string resources there. We have the enter placemark title, we have the save placemark, all right, and here we have them in the resources file in general, and specifically this is the strings. Now, in theory, because they're all wrapped up in a resources tag and they're all specified and kind of declared as the particular type of resource, whether it's a string, whether it's a layout, whether it's a menu item, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a color and themes and all the rest of it, you could in theory dump all those into one massive resource file, but it would become quite unmanageable as new resources came along. So that's why we have it all split up into those separate strings, menus, layout, resource folders. Okay, so to look at it specifically, there's our enter placemark title. There it is in the resource file itself. So again, we have the variable name essentially, and then the value. So we can refer to it with the variable name. Okay, and you can see there in that example here, we've what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dozen or so resources. And again, this is quite a small application, so you can see as your application will get more complex, more a much richer UI, more in this case string resources, maybe more colors, more widgets and all the rest of it, your resource files would start to get quite large. Okay, there's the next one, your save placemark. So again, makes a lot more sense that if we need to use save placemark somewhere else, and we can just change it to once in the resource file, and then it's reflected everywhere else that we use it through that r.string. Whatever the case may be. Now, where it really does come into its own is with localization. So if you can try and imagine you want to install have it up on a different Play Store in a different country, that rather than having to hard code in different languages and different messages in your app, you can just have the separate resource files for, be it English, be it German, Italian, French, whatever, and your app can automatically access that ES for Spain resource file, or IT for Italy, or whatever the case, FR for France, and all the rest of it. Okay, so resources are, it's worth knowing the kind of full extent that you can make use of resources within your application. Okay, in terms of resources and Android Studio, just something to kind of know as well, is kind of useful. Android Studio will automatically show string values when you roll over the resource reference. So here's a screenshot here, because I just took a screenshot of the one of the project itself. We have referenced inside our snack bar r.string.enter _ placemark _ title, but if we want to see what the actual text is, we can just roll over with our mouse, and Android Studio will tell you what it happens to be at the time. And if you want to, you could actually go in and edit it from there as well. So there's a few other options if you were to click on that your ellipse there, the little 3 dots. Okay, so kind of handy feature within Android Studio itself. Okay, in terms of the R class, It's as kind of mentioned previously, it's auto-generated by Android development tools, right? It maps your IDs defined in the XML to your Java or your Kotlin names. Now we're all working with Kotlin, but these were still in place when Android apps would have been built with built in Java. So the approach is still exactly the same. If you want to find it, that's where it would actually be created and generated. Now, it's strongly recommended not to go near that file, and you shouldn't really edit it. And you can see over here just a little example. These are all kind of the default. See, look, ABC fade in, ABC fade out. These are just screenshots. This is a screenshot of just some of the default resources that you would get with every Android app that you would generate, and our own ones would also be dumped in here as well. And every time we add a new resource, whether it's a simple string, whether it's an image, whatever it happens to be, new layout, that will be updated within the R class, and given a unique, you can see it there, a unique kind of hexadecimal, and that's how it's referenced within the project itself. So it's strongly recommended not to go tricking around with this, and that's why it's kind of, I wouldn't say hidden away, but it's not as easily accessible as it used to be. And I suppose one point to note, just from kind of a day-to-day business when building your applications, if there's a single error, even a missing quote or a missing tag within any of your XML resource files, your overall project won't build, and potentially you could lose references to all those other resources. So it's very important that when you're working, and especially if you're cutting and pasting XML into the raw file, as opposed to working with the kind of the visual editor, be very careful that you don't have any kind of errors within it as you're going to kind of progress with building the app. So always make sure that when you are going to paste in, and especially with some of the labs that I give you, I would, to speed things up, give you the XML code to paste in over what's there already, or what to add in. So just be very careful when you're doing that, because any errors at all, as I say, even a single missing tag will cause a build error, and your project just won't run. So you need to kind of retrace your steps if you were manually editing one of those one of your resource files. Okay, so that's a bit on the R class itself. Okay, how it actually works, I suppose, just a kind of a visual look at it. We have our own XML resources, so we add those in, right? The link is the R class between the resources, which are external, separate folders, with our Java or our Kotlin code within our activities, or wherever the case may be. Okay, so again, just kind of worth knowing about. In terms of the official docs, you can see there's a lot of different types of resource types up there. You can see your animation. Again, look, r.anim. Our drawable, so again, would have been using some of those as well. We have our colors, so in our r.color, the specific drawable ones, again, as I say, in your r.drawable. Our layouts, which we're familiar with, r.layout. Your strings, r.string, or if you want to have an array of strings, you refer to it as r.array. We have our styles, and there's themes there as well, and if you want some specific fonts, that's there too. Okay, so there's kind of a lot more information up there if you want to delve a bit deeper into it. But for what we're working with, what we've been doing at the moment would probably be enough kind of knowledge about the module. Okay, so again, just a recap on our own Placemark resources. You can see them there. Again, all split up into their separate folders, if for no other reason, just to be able to manage. And your map there, yeah, these are our actual images themselves. All right, and you can see the different launchers, whether it's and the different resolutions. You can see them there. And then we have our colors and our strings, and then finally our themes down the bottom there. So most of the work that we're doing is generally, once we initially set up, will be around the layouts, maybe adding in some menus, maybe adding in some images. And I would actually, even though it's XML up here, I would recommend, if you find any images that you want to use yourself, I would suggest and recommend just dropping them into the drawable folder. Okay, the MIP map are kind of, if you want to have and you're considering deploying this to the Play Store, and you're working off different screen resolutions, is that you can auto generate the different versions of a particular image that you might have. And again, those tools are within Android Studio itself to allow you to do that. Okay. And again, as I said, we would have been working initially some with colors, but a lot with strings. So it's really the strings, menus, and layouts are what you generally work with most often. Okay. And will be the case for our this particular module. Okay, so other than that, I think that's more or less it. Just as your references up on the official developer docs. So thanks for listening, and goodbye. Hello everyone, and welcome to the next section. So in this, we're going to kind of focus on, in this section, model updates, we're going to focus on the creating and updating a placemark. So we would have been, this is kind of overlapping with the lab. So we're kind of looking at some of the solutions to some of the exercises that you would have been required to complete, and some of the and part of the lab to complete in terms of the ability to make the modifications to be able to update as well as add a particular placemark. Okay, and kind of cause the list to update and refresh accordingly. Okay, so the agenda for today, we'll have a quick recap on the exercises that would have been involved with the whole process. We'll then look at the update, cancel, and refresh features in a bit of detail and kind of explain them a little bit more in terms of how they function. We'll then look at the different kind of use cases and between if a user is adding a placemark versus if they are updating a placemark, and then just a little bit on that function there, notify data set change, because it is quite useful, so it's kind of worth knowing about too. Okay, so the exercise in terms of with the particular lab, in exercise 2 there, we had to add a button label. Okay, so just to read it again, just to recap, when you select the placemark and placemark activity is launched, okay, so we're kind of back to that. Initially it's our add activity. Okay, the button label is still add placemark. See if you can change this to save placemark, and this is only to be changed if placemark activity is launched with a placemark passed to it. So make sure that the save placemark string is externalized, so in a strings.xml. So it's quite a lot I was asking you to do there, and mainly it's to give a slightly better user experience, so that the user knows and they're aware that they're saving or updating a placemark that already exists as opposed to adding a new one. So there would have been some important changes that were required to be made behind the scenes to make that happen. Okay, so we'll kind of look at those in this particular section. Okay, the most important bits anyway. Then exercise 3 there, the solution. Right, so introduce a local flag on create, and always initialize the false. So to begin with, what we're doing is we're bringing in this a flag. We're going to call it edit, right, which initially will be set to false, and then we will toggle that depending on whether or not a placemark has been passed to from placemark list activity to placemark activity. So if the user has clicked on a placemark in the list, we will literally grab that object and pass it in its entirety to the placemark activity, which was initially the add kind of feature that we had built in. Okay, so you can see it down here in our code. So just to kind of break it down a little bit of detail, we see this a few times in this section, but it's no harm kind of going over it, and can be useful to kind of sometimes to repeat ourselves. So we're checking to see if there is this parsable object has been passed in the intent that we launched from placemark list activity. So we're doing a check here. So, and we tagged it as placemark underscore edit. So if that does have any extra information in it, then we know that the user has clicked on a placemark in the list, and that is being passed to placemark activity. So inside that block, that if block, we update our edit. So this is for later on so that we know that we are in edit mode and we're not in kind of add create mode. Okay, and then we extract the placemark object itself. So we will cover that in the previous section, dealing with parcelable and all the rest of it. And then we update the title and description with the title and description from the placemark object that has been passed to it. And this is the important bit for us, we set the text of the button add to save underscore placemark as opposed to the initial kind of add. Okay, so again, not a huge amount of code, but does achieve what we want. Okay, in terms of the specific update, right, there's a few bits we need to add in. Okay, so in the our first little block of code there, this is our on placemark click. So this is back in our placemark list activity. So this is what happens when the user clicks on a placemark in our list. So again, this goes back to the previous section again, where we would have added in some kind of event handling and listeners, specifically a click event, so that when the user clicks on a row in the list, we trigger this event back in placemark list activity. So this was within the adapter itself, which will trigger a call to on placemark click, passing in the placemark that has been selected. We generate a particular intent specifying that we want to target that placemark activity. We then add our placemark, there it is there, we add our placemark to that intent via put extra, and we tag it with placemark underscore edit, and then we call, for the moment anyway at least, start activity for result, which will go off and launch trigger the intent and launch the activity that we specified, which was placemark activity. So back in placemark activity, here's our code again. That's how we're checking it. So if we have passed information, we update our edit flag, we retrieve it, and then update the UI accordingly. So, and this is what a user would expect if they're in edit mode. They would expect to see the details ready to be updated, changed, whatever the case may be. And this is all inside placemark activity. So this, as I said, our placemark is sent to placemark activity, and we set our title to save if a placemark is detected. So again, that's why we have to wrap it all up in an if. We're doing multiple. We've now got multiple features inside our placemark activity. We've got the ability to add a placemark, and we've now got the ability to edit, update a placemark. Okay, so the rest of the slides really kind of focus on that in a bit more detail. Okay, so if we look at the update feature itself, so we have to rework that add button. Okay, as follows. So inside, this is our on click listener. So inside the full block, so what we're doing is we're going to utilize that edit flag again. So here, so irrespective of whether the user is in edit or update mode, when they click on that, whether it's add or whether it's save, this still gets triggered. Okay, notice we haven't included a new update button. We're still working with that same button add, but we're going to utilize it for a different function, and a couple of functions for both adding and editing. Okay, so either way, we still grab the title and description from the UI, from those particular edit texts, and here's our kind of check to see what mode we're in and what we're doing. So again, as before, if the title is empty, we're going to tell the user, sorry, you need to enter a title, and we don't continue, so we don't make any changes. Otherwise, so once there is a title there, whether it's the same title or whether they've added a new title, right, we jump into the else block. Okay, so if we're in edit mode, this is important, we call the update feature of our kind of that placemarks interface, which will update an existing and overwrite an existing placemark. Hence, and remember, we're still passing in a copy. Otherwise, we call create, which will create and add a new placemark to our list of placemarks. So that's where we're making use of that edit flag. So that's quite important. If we didn't have if we weren't checking the edit flag, even though they're an edit, it would still be creating a new placemark every time, which is obviously not what's expected. Okay, and then we just have some kind of logs there just to keep track of everything. And for the moment, at least anyway, we're still working with that kind of the activity result API. So we set the result to make sure everything was okay, and then we call finish and kill off the placemark activity and return back the placemark list activity, which is our list. So just to kind of be complete about it there, here's what we're doing. So we're checking to see if we are in our editing mode, right? If we're editing an existing placemark. If we are, we're calling update. Otherwise, we're in the add mode, and we call the create function. All right. There's another option there, cancel. Okay, which is straightforward enough. So if the user chooses cancel, and this would have been in the lab as well, they just we don't do anything, and we just finish and kill off the activity. Similar to this, just calling finish. Okay. So as I said, there's the cancel feature. So again, it's pretty straightforward. Inside, it's a menu option, so we're inside our on options item selected. So if the item ID, we've added this one option there. If they choose cancel, we just do explicit about it. We just check to make sure that is what's been chosen, and we just call finish as I mentioned on the previous slide there. Okay, so again, not too much extra in that, but it is useful and a feature that the user would expect if they don't want to make any changes, so that we kind of there's as little overhead as possible in terms of processing. Okay, so that once we cancel, we don't actually do anything, we just return back. Okay. In terms of the refresh, which was one of I suppose a purposeful bug in the lab, just to highlight the fact that this notified dataset changed is quite useful. Okay, so when the placemark activity finishes and the placemark list resumes, we want to refresh the adapter. We want to basically tell our adapter your data has changed, whether it's new data or whether the existing data has been changed. So you need to refresh yourself that the underlying data has changed. So we invoke that with the .notified dataset changed on the adapter of the recycler view that we have bound to in our overall layout. Okay, and that's done in the activity result. So when we return from placemark activity back to placemark list activity, because we would have used our start activity with result call to trigger, passing in the intent to trigger the calling and launching of placemark activity. Once that finishes through the finish, whether it's the cancel or whether it's the user creating or adding a new one, comes back to placemark list activity. This function is called automatically, and we have the line of code here to call notified dataset change on the adapter, basically telling it to refresh itself. Okay, which again is returned back, and we get something like this, depending on what you may have done with the list. Okay. So the particular use cases are as follows. So if we're starting with no placemark and it's a new, or want to add a new one, we have our checking with the item underscore add, right? Within the that's the little plus. If the plus has been selected up in our menu, we still launch placemark activity, but we're not passing any placemark with it because this is a new one. Okay. If we have gone into the edit mode, so to speak, and the user has selected a placemark from the list, it's on placemark click is triggered, which internally we create an intent, add a placemark through that .put extra, tag it with placemark underscore edit, and start activity for result, again launching the intent, targeting placemark activity, but this time we have passed a placemark with the intent. And then on the placemark activity side, we have our if statement, our clause there to check to see are we in edit mode or are we not. Okay. Finally there, when the placemark activity is finished, we refresh placemark list. So when we come back to placemark list activity, we trigger our on activity result, and we call notify dataset change to update our adapter and ultimately the list. Okay. It's a little from the developer docs there, just saying a little bit of information about what notify dataset change does for us. Notifies the attached observers that the underlying data has been changed, and any view reflecting the data should refresh itself. Okay, so that's it's a single function call, but can be very, very useful just to make sure that if somewhere else in your app your data has changed, by calling notify dataset change on the adapter that is the adapter that's part of the recycle view that's displaying that data, that automatically will update and will refresh itself and look for that new data. Okay, I think that's it. Yeah, okay, so there's our developer docs again, just the single reference. So other than that, thanks again. And hello everyone, welcome to the next section in kind of this week's material. So we're going to look specifically now at working with images and placemarks. So what we want to be able to do is be able to kind of allow the user to select an image from a gallery and then add that to our placemark data, so we can associate an image with a particular placemark. Okay, but before we kind of jump into that and jump in, we need to kind of cover kind of a little bit of background. So what I want to cover in this section is first of all, we just kind of look at images in Android in general, and some of the framework that Android uses to make it easier for developers to work with images. We look at some of the official docs and kind of what information they give us. We'll then look at the activity results API. This is a new way of dealing with callbacks when we kick off other activities and we return back. So this is quite a new. It's a different and a new departure from what has been the case from day one. So we'll spend a bit of time on that one. And then finally we'll look at images and placemark specifically, and how we do it in our placemark case study, and how we allow the user then to open up the gallery, choose an image, and how we then associate that image with a placemark, and then display it in the list in that recycle view. Okay, so to begin with, just talk a little bit about in general images in Android. So the official docs will tell us that we use what's called the storage access framework, right? So just to read the official blurb there. So Android, it's gone back a while now. So back since Android 4.4 introduces the storage access framework, the SAF, which makes it simple for users to browse and open documents, images, and other files across all of their preferred document storage providers. A standard, easy-to-use UI lets users browse files and access recents in a consistent way across apps and providers. So, in a nutshell, you don't have to go off and write a different app and have all these different screens to try and navigate within your app to where images might be stored on the device, or even not on the device locally, even on your Google Drive or a USB or whatever. So the storage access framework adds in this extra kind of layer for the developers, that we can launch essentially these other UIs to allow us to get in and access and view and select these particular images. Okay. There's a link there at the bottom there, just kind of to go into a little bit more detail about that. But to talk a little bit about it, it enables the following: allow you to browse content from all document providers, not just a single app. Again, so you can bring in, as you can see there in the screenshot, you've got your the downloads folder. You've got, if you happen to have an SD card installed, it'll find it there. You can even access your Google Drive and any other document providers that you might have access to. Even Dropbox there, you can actually add that in as well. Makes it possible for your app to have a long-term persistent access to documents owned by a document provider. Okay, so it keeps that link there. Doesn't it mean that every time you go in, the association with that file is lost? It allows that for a long-term persistent access. Through this access, users can add, edit, save, and delete files on the provider. It supports multiple user accounts and transient routes, such as USB storage providers, which only appear if the drive is plugged in. So obviously, if you don't have an external card and in the device, it's not going to show up. But the SAF allows that to happen, so that when it is in, it'll show it. When it's not, it won't. Okay. a little bit more about the official docs there. It includes the following. There's a document provider, there's the client app, and then there's the picker itself. So the document provider is a content provider that allows a storage device, for example, your Google Drive, to reveal the files it manages. A document provider is implemented as a subclass of the documents provider class. The document provider schema is based on a traditional file hierarchy, though how you document or how your document provider physically stores that is really up to you. So, and we will kind of focus on that ourselves a little bit. We'll be using JSON to store and have a link to our particular images, okay, and our files essentially. The Android platform includes several built-in document providers such as downloads, images, and videos. So again, irrespective of what device you're on, and what kind of app you're building, you will have access through the SAF to these built-in document providers. So you will always have access to the downloads within your on the device, the images or access to images and videos that happen to be stored on that particular device. Okay. Then there's the client app, which is a custom app that invokes the action create document and action open document and action open document tree intent actions and receives the files returned by document provider. So, and we will see this a little bit in more detail in our code. So when we want to actually launch that client app, we need to create that intent and launch with one of those particular actions to tell the UI, tell the SAF what we want to do. Do we want to create a document? Are we just going to open a document? Or do we want to navigate? Do we want to open a full document tree? Okay, and finally then there's the picker itself, which is in that screenshot that we just saw. It's a system UI that lets users access documents from all document providers that satisfy the client's app search criteria. So again, you can go in there, you can select your downloads, you can, if you have a USB, you click on the USB and the UI will filter out that information. That's kind of like the search criteria. So you can browse, select, kind of update and as needs be. In terms of just a little bit more on the official docs, right? Just kind of a little graphic there trying to visualize how it actually works. Okay, so it centers around a content provider that is a subclass of the document providers, as we said. Within a document provider, data is structured as a traditional file hierarchy. So we've got our initial route there that points to which could be a single document, right? Which could be the document itself, or could be that folder which would have within it more documents, more files, usually images and say it for me, videos, but it's any kind of files really. That's what that storage access framework allows you access to. All right, little example there, kind of how a photo app. So if we were kind of tie in with our placemark, but if you were building some kind of an app that needed access to photos or images on the particular device, so what we would have something like this ourselves. This would be your own app, so to speak, right? So you would have a option within your app to kick off that picker UI, so that will then have access to possibly your Google Drive through the Drive dock provider, through the USB dock provider, or something in the cloud through a cloud dock provider. So some could be, as I said, could be iCloud, could be even open a Dropbox or whatever the case may be, right? And then we have on this side, we have a photo viewer and a photo editor, and that will feed back into that picker UI itself. So depending on what intent action you used to open the UI, you will be either in the viewer mode or in the editor mode. And again, that's driven by that in the particular intent action. So we will see some of these later on in our placemark example, okay? Hopefully when you actually when we look at the code in a little bit of detail, it'll hopefully give you a little bit more kind of a sense and a bit more understanding of how it all hangs together, okay? But at the end of the day, it's this framework that tries to kind of shift the workload from the developer back into the Android system itself, and back into that particular framework. So what you have to do is use a couple of intents and some, as we'll see later on now, using the activity results API, a way to launch these so that when we return back to where the activity that wanted to find the image, that we can handle then the result that comes back. Okay, So to talk about just kind of the process that we need to go through with images and placemark ourselves, right? These are the steps that we will go through to incorporate the ability to select images and then associate them with a placemark in our application. Okay, so initially we'll have to include an image view in the layout, so that's kind of where we'll start. And this we'll see a lot of this in the lab as well. Okay, so as you're working through the lab, these are the kind of steps I will take you through to actually implement this feature. Okay, so initially we'd work with the layout, we'll add an image view, then we'll bring in some helper functions, and that first one there is going to be show image picker, so that will have within it that intent action to go off and open or kick off the SAF, that UI picker, in a kind of a view mode as opposed to an edit mode. We're not creating anything here, we just want to select images that exist already. Okay, we'll then introduce an event handler for the add image button and show picker. We'll then have to extend the placemark model to store the image URI. So we're going to bring in a new property which will keep track of the URI of that particular image, and that will allow us to access it later on. We'll incorporate a third-party library to load the image from the picker. So we're going to use Picasso there, and we'll look at the examples of that in the code as well. And then finally, when the placemark activity loaded for an existing model, we will load the image from again using that same image URI that's part of the model. So when the user is in an edit mode, that they will click on a placemark in the list, will load up our placemark activity, and that will then display the existing image that the user had previously chosen to associate with that particular placemark. So there's the kind of the steps that we need to go through, and again, it's quite not a trivial set of tasks. Okay, so to take a look at some of the code, we'll step through some of the what we need to do. So initially there, we include the image view in the layout. So again, this shouldn't be too difficult. So we have we bring in a new button features there, we're calling it choose image. This is how it'll render. We have the image view, which is like the placeholder for that particular image. There's our placemark image. We're going to load it up in there. So all this will go inside. This is the extra XML I'll ask you to add in. And again, this is inside placemark activity. Initially, working through the steps, here's our string resource, which will be reflected within the button itself. And just to begin with, we will bind to it and set a non-click list, and set a click event on it, and just display select image to the console. So we're not going to dive straight in, we're just going to build it up little by little. So this will be the first step in bringing in and just checking that what the user expects to happen, the functionality that when we click on add image, we trigger that event. Initially, we're just going to prompt to the console, log it and say select image. Okay. Now, and aside from that, because basically what we want to happen ultimately is when the user clicks that add image button, we would kick off via the SAF, kick off the UI, allow the user to select an image, and then return back to that placemark activity and change. If I just go back to the screen again, so when the user will click this button, we want to launch that UI picker to allow the user to browse any images that are currently on the device. And when the user has selected that image, we want to return back to our placemark activity and replace that our placeholder image view with the image that the user has selected. So this what we need to do there is we have to have some kind of a callback, so that when we launch, we kick off the intent when the intent finishes, and that the UI picker closes, we return back to our placemark activity. So what we do there is we're going to have to take the new approach, which is using the activity results API, right? In previous kind of incarnations, what would have happened is you'd kick off your start activity for result, identifying the intent and the class, the activity that you want to start, and then you would return back to one function inside that activity which would manage all scenarios. So in our case, ultimately we're going to be adding an image, we're going to be adding a location, so that will be two separate kind of callbacks that we need to manage. In older versions of Android, that would all be wrapped up in one single a callback function. Now the approach is to separate out those particular scenarios into its separate little code blocks. So we will have to write separate functions to manage the separate callbacks. And if you think about it, it as I'll cover in the next couple of slides, it separates out that it kind of the individual functionality that's required. So in the long run, it's actually easier to manage. Okay, but just to talk a little bit about it, this is taken from the official docs. So while the underlying start activity for result and on activity result APIs are available on the activity class on all API levels, it is strongly recommended to use the activity results API introduced in Android X within activity and within fragments. So for the moment, we're just working with activities. You can still do this within fragments as well. Okay. The activity result APIs provide components for registering for a result, launching the result, and handling the result once it is dispatched by the system. So what we need, there's three things we need to do. So for every callback that you need to manage, right? When I talk about callback, I mean where you're going to launch another activity via an intent and then return back to the initial calling activity. Okay, so we will need to, for each one of those, we have to register for that result, we have to launch it, and then we have to handle it. Okay, so there's kind of the three steps in that particular order. Okay, so what we look at, I just talk a little bit more about it, just to give you a little bit more details behind it, and then we look at some examples of how that actually works. Okay, the activity results API decouple the result callback from the place in your code where you launch the other activity. So the callback needs to be available or registered. So that's the first thing we'll always need to do. The API itself provides a register for activity result API for registering the result callback. So we're going to use that initially. That can take a couple of different parameters. It can take an activity result contract and an activity result callback. These are separate classes themselves, and returns an activity result launcher, which you'll use to launch the other activity. So these are individual objects that we need to define, we need to set up to basically instruct the app on what it needs to launch, where it needs to come back to. Okay, so just to break those down specifically, an activity result contract defines the input type needed to produce a result along with the output type of the result. An activity result callback is a single method interface with an onActivity result method. So that's kind of like going back to the old approach. It's just going to be wrapped up in a separate class that takes an object of the output type defined in the activity result contract. So there will be compile time checks done there. So when you're if you have different types, if you can see it there, the contract takes the input type, right, and the output type. If they don't match inside the result callback, you'll get compile time errors. So you just need to be just be aware of that as well. Okay, so if we look at some examples of registering, so the first step will be registering a callback for an activity result. Okay, now you can call it whatever you want. So in this case, this example here is just called refresh intent launcher, because what I want to do is I want to refresh the recycler view when we return back to the list to make sure it's updated. So this is of type activity result launcher. We're just specifying that there's a single intent going to be passed to it. Okay. Then we have a separate function which will actually register it. All this is doing is just declaring it. To actually register it, I'm going to wrap it up in a register refresh callback function, and we assign it. There's the variable we just declared, our refresh intent launcher, and we say register for activity result, passing in, we're saying activity results contracts dot start activity for results. So all we want to do in this instance is simply what will happen is that a activity will be started, and when we return back, this is what we want triggered. We want to say our binding.recycler.adapter.notify data set change. So when the other activity finishes and we return back to the original activity, it's just a single line of code we want to execute. So we're not, it's just, as I said, it's a single intent. We're not passing in any extra information. We will see later examples of where we do have to pass information. This is the kind of the most I suppose simple, straightforward type of implementation using this activity result API. So we just have to and we just pass in a single parameter into our register for activity result, and it's just that single because we specified intent up here. We just want to launch that intent start activity for result, not passing any extra information. Okay, just a slightly more a kind of advanced example. So in this instance here again, we're just launching, but when we come back we're going to work with some information. So here we are, and this is our image intent launcher. This is again very similar to what we will see in the lab and in the case study. So we're registering our image picker callback. So this what we're going to use this for is we will launch our intent, we will launch the other activity. Specifically it'll be that UI to allow us to pick an image, but when we return back, we have our register for activity result. We're going to pass back a result, which will have a result code which we can check here, and once that's okay, we can get at the data, and that data will actually be a link and a reference to the image that the user has selected from the UI picker, and that's what we're going to use down here. We're going to update. We will have modified our placemark object, adding in an image property, which we will then update the result.data.data. This, I know it looks a little bit cryptic, but that will be the actual URI of the overall data object that's passed back in that result, and we assign that to our image, and then we use Picasso, and it's very nice little library to load into the placemark image, or sorry, load the URI, which is the placemark.image, into our placemark image reference, our image view on the layout. Okay, so there's a little bit more going on here than just as in the previous example, which was just that refreshing of the recycle view. So we're dealing with the result that's passed back, but notice this is all wrapped up inside that single function, register image picker callback. In previous versions, when we in previous versions of placemark and prior to the activity result API, we will be checking this result for both the image and ultimately a location as well, and we would have to have extra checks in here, so it would all be wrapped up in that single callback. Whereas the new approach now is to separate out the different use cases, the different scenarios. So this is one particular scenario where the user is looking for the image, so we process it like so. We will see a different one for the location, but as I said, we'll focus on that when we need to, when the time comes. Okay, so and that's just registering the callback. Actually launching the callback, there's more involved in that. So while the register for activity result registers your callback, it does not launch the other activity and kick off the request for a result. This is the responsibility of the returned activity result launcher instance. So this is something else that we need to do as developers to implement this whole process. If input exists, the launcher takes the input that matches the type of the activity result contract. Calling launch starts the process of producing the result. So we have it registered, so we know what will happen when we return, but we have to actually launch the callback essentially, okay, to trigger the loading of, could be another activity. In our instance, in this particular case, it's launching that UI picker from the storage access framework, the SAF. Okay, now I have a little note there. The activity results contracts contains a number of pre-built contract classes for you to use. You can provide your own contracts to provide the precise types of API you require. So there's a lot more information there up on the developer docs, but there's some, as I said, and we will use some of these ourselves. There's some pre-built classes that you can use for opening images, opening individual documents, even opening videos, or whatever the case may be. So you can write your own ones if you need, but there's some pre-built ones again to try and make it a little bit easier for the developer. Okay, so how we launch an activity for a result, right? So up here, so this will be a little code snippet. So what we're looking at here is, here we are creating the intent. So this is if the user has chosen add. This is back in placemark list activity. So this is at the top of placemark list activity. This is our item add button, the little plus at the top. So what we do is we create the intent. So this is, we would be familiar with this, specifying the class and activity that we want to launch. But then we say refresh intent launcher dot launch, or the intent, the launcher intent. So this is what we have registered. This is already registered. We are now launching it, which will then kick off that activity. And when that placemark activity completes, it will return back to the registered code that we have implemented. Okay. So to look at some of the other code there first, this is some of the steps that we need to go through. And again, bringing in some of those intent actions based on the activity framework, the activity results API. Okay, so here we have the storage access framework. So there's our show image picker. So down here, this is what we will launch. So this is we make a second change and kind of a refactoring to our placemark. Initially, if you can remember, when the user would click on that add image, we were initially logging it to the screen. We're now calling show image picker, passing in our image intent launcher. Okay, so that's passed in here into our show image picker. And what this does, and we launch it inside here, you can see it there, the final line there, intent launcher.launch, passing in the ability to go and choose and select a file. So here we are, we're creating a new intent, but we're using one of the storage access framework intent actions. So action open document, specifying and filtering the type is just images. So that will load up and display for us just images within that nice UI picker. Okay, and we specify some other properties here. We create our chooser, and that's what we pass to our intent launcher. So what that will achieve for us within, as you can see there, 4 or 5 lines of code, is when the user clicks the add image button, it will launch that UI. It will allow the user to browse through all the different providers, whether it's within your downloads, whether it's your Google Drive, if you have a USB, SD card connected, the SD card, allow you to choose the image. And because we have registered our image intent launcher previously, this would display the UI picker. When the user selects the image, it will kill off that UI picker and return back to, again, the registered code for within the callback. Okay, which will then go and process and get the URI, which we then update within the placemark model itself. Okay, so again, there's quite a lot going on behind the scenes, but within the lab, once we have our callback declared and registered, and then we launch it, Android and the operating system looks after everything else via that storage access framework. Okay. So again, just to repeat, handling that results. So here we are. So in the previous, so just to go back to that screen again. So here, this code, this will launch and display that UI picker and allow the user to go off and navigate and select. This code here specifically sets that up. When we return back to our placemark activity, there's the same image intent launcher that we would have registered, and this is what's triggered in here. So this is the callback code that gets triggered once the user has selected the image and the UI picker kind of UI is closed. Okay. So the second function, or second step, we're kind of bringing it all together now, was incorporate that code. So what I do is I ask it just to bring in and wrap it up in an image helpers.kt. I think I actually put it inside a helpers. I do actually, there's the package size, so that screenshot's a little bit off there. There should be a helpers package there as well. So if you can see it here, org.with.placemark.helpers. So just keep an eye on that in the lab, because we will be adding in some other helper functions within that helpers package, just separate functions. This one is showing the image picker. We'll have other ones kind of like the grab a location and so on and so forth. So what we get here with that code, so this code here gives us this here. So this will allow the user then to select a particular image, and once the user selects that image, it will return back, it will shut down, return back, and execute that code that's inside that register code block that we would have written. Okay. I suppose one point to note, if it's the first time you're running your I think I said in the lab anyway, but if it's the first time you're running your application, you won't have any images. So what you might need to do is you could leave that running, or kind of shut it down altogether and just come back to it, and go on to kick off Google Chrome, kick off a browser, go find some images, and a long press will pop up a little dialog to say save the image, and that will save it into your downloads. Okay. And if you notice there again, look, there's a little search option. You can change the view. All this is from the SAF, the Storage Access Framework. You don't need to go and write this. That will be displayed for us, which is very, very useful. Okay. Some of the rest of the steps we need to take. Introduce the event handler. So again, I've covered that in the context of the Activity Results API. Here it is now just within the application itself. So what we get is the user clicks on the add image, displays we're showing the image picker, displays the UI picker, passing in that intent launcher, so that we know that when we finish and return back here, we can update that image view with the image itself based on its URI that we have retrieved from that result object, the data.data. If you can remember that, that's where it'll be stored. Okay. Some of the changes to the model that we made, as I've kind of discussed already. There's the image, it's a URI, so just give it a value of empty for the moment. And that will allow us then to use Picasso quite nicely to load that up. Here's our, as I said, here's our usage of the Picasso library. Literally one liner I've just put, we're chaining some methods there, functions, just putting on separate lines of code to make it a little bit more understandable. So here we are updating our image with result.data.data, which will be that particular URI, and then we load that URI into binding.placemark image. So our placemark image is that placemark image image view back on placemark activity. Okay. Just what we get, the final result. So again, can remember what's happening. So the user would have clicked on it. Now this is the final kind of screenshot. So this is one of the exercises as well, how you can update it to change placemark image text as opposed to add image. So when the user initially clicks on add, this gets launched. The user selects the image. Because of the callback mechanism we're using, that URI is retrieved from the result object that's sent back and updated then in that image view placemark holder called placemark image, like so. And we use Picasso to do that. Okay. If it's coming from an existing, if it's already there, we update the edit section in our placemark activity. So you can see here, if the intent that has extra placemark _ edit, so the user has clicked on a row in the recycler view, so we already have a placemark in the list with an image. They want to change the image or edit the overall placemark. The user selects the placemark. All the code is before populating the title and description, and now we add in another call to Picasso to load up that same URI into that existing image view called placemark image. Okay. I think that's about it. Yep. Okay. So that's just kind of the standard resources again. Now I understand and appreciate there's quite a lot in that. Okay. So I do try and take you through the lab quite step by step. So a lot of that code you will be seeing again in the labs, but it will kind of be pieced together step by step. But I'll be online for the lab, so if you have any issues while you're working through it, please get in touch over Slack, or if you need to, you can contact me by email as well. Okay, so thanks for listening, And hello everyone, so welcome to the next version of our placemark. This is version 4, so this is the one that has the kind of the image support built in, and we would have covered this in the lectures. We're talking about the SAF, loading up that UI picker, allowing us to select a photograph, an image, and then associate that image with our placemark. Okay, so this is the one with the exercises in it, so you can actually kind of refer to this if you run into a few issues or have a bit of difficulty with implementing those exercises, because there is quite a lot going on. Okay, so we'll just run through the app first, and then we'll have a quick look at some of the code. Okay, so what to expect is, if you can see here on the right hand side, here's our application running. So again, no persistence yet, so we've no place marks created yet. So if we go and create one, so again up to our add, so we can offer a title. So I put in a title, and I gotta know what I'm going to pick here, the picture. Okay, and what we can do now is, as you can see here, the extra features that we have brought in. We have our add image button, and we have the placeholder image view to display that button or display that image. Okay, so when we click on add image, what happens is behind the scenes we kick off the UI picker, we are displayed with our images, and when we select those images, we return back and update that image view with the image that we've just selected. And again, that's a URI that we're using. Okay, we use Picasso to do that. So there I am choosing my look for the image. I'm taking it to my recents, and again, this would have been testing, so I have a couple of other images in here testing some other apps. So I'm going to go down to this one, and when I select it, there it goes. So it replaces it, updates the placemark image view. So when we add it, we're taken back, and then it's there in our list. Okay, so if we can add, we'll add another one. I don't know, what do we call it there? A place. So we can go back in and edit if we want. Description, lovely visit, or whatever it might be. Add image, and if we scroll down again, and we'll pick this one, Colosseum, and there it is displayed in there, right? And again, if I add placemark, and there it is. And again, when we return them back to our original placemark list activity, we have that other callback to just refresh that list to ensure that the list is updated. So if I wanted to go in and edit, edit one of these, so we'll edit the Colosseum, go in there. The image is still there, and then I can change that, for argument's sake, Rome. And if I want to, I can save placemark again. So go back, so that's edited, and then if I want, I can actually change the image as well. So if I want to change placemark image, go back in and pick another one there, these guys, and there you go. And if we do save placemark again, there it is, all updated. Okay, and I'm using Picasso to have a kind of a uniform resize of these, or actually I do that in a later version. So this one, I think it just takes the default, so it will just whatever size we would have set the image image view placeholder to here. That's the way the image is rendered. Okay, so that's the app functioning. So that's hopefully, once you've completed the exercises, that's what you would get. But if you do run into a few issues, I'm just going to quickly run through the code, and a couple of things to highlight. And again, this is with Android 12, so just be careful. This is a new edition. If you're targeting Android 12, your launcher activity needs to have this Android exported value set to true. Okay, so that's one little change you need to just be aware of. Inside our placemark list activity, so that's the first activity the user gets to see. So here we are declaring our activity result launcher, which again takes that simple intent. It can't take other, as we covered in the lectures, it can't take other objects, but for the moment we're keeping it fairly straightforward, kind of the standard approach, basic intent. And so that just declares it. Here we are, I have it inside a function just to separate it out a little bit, which is register the refresh callback. You could, in theory, dump in all the code in there, but it might start making your own create a little bit unmanageable. So what I've done is, in that which we would have covered in the lectures as well. Our register refresh callback I have down the bottom here. So what we do is, so this is what we want triggered when the callback ends and when we return back to where it was called from. So this will be triggered or launched, should I say, when the user clicks on that add button. So where that is up here. Actually, I'll expand that window for you so we can see what's going on. Okay, so down here, this is where I implement or write just that function register refresh callback. I could have, because I suppose in this case it's only a couple of lines, we could have actually placed that up in the on create. So the steps are you declare it, you register it, and with generally when you register it, you have to write the code necessary for what you want executed when the callback returns. And then the final thing you do is, as we're doing up here in our on options item selected, is actually launch the intent with our dot launch. And again, notice we have to pass in an intent because we've declared it to take an intent up the top. Again, just to show you, we'll go scroll up there. We specified here it's an intent, which means when we launch it down here, that needs to be an intent also. And so here we are, our launcher intent. And in our launcher intent, pretty straightforward. All we're doing is specifying that we want to kick off that placemark activity. Okay, so most of the work then is going on, or the heavy lifting, shall we say, is done inside that placemark activity. Okay, so if we look at that placemark activity, again we'll expand that. So here we are up here, once again declaring our activity result launcher. If we scroll down, if you can remember what's going to launch it, launching it is actually selecting the ad. So again, if you actually jump into it again, if we go over here back to our app, when we go to add a new placemark, right, it's this button here is going to launch that new intent, which in turn will display our UI picker. So that add image, this is a button in this case. So back over here, if we click on our add image, we're calling it choose image. This is it here. So inside our choose image, we're calling that show image picker, which in turn is taking that image intent launcher that we declared up the top. So we'll see how we will launch that inside show image picker. But to look at the full registration code, again, just to scroll back, sorry, just to show you, and there's our on create. Inside there, sorry, yeah, there we go. Okay, so there's our register. We're doing it at the end of the last thing we do in our on create. Again, you could in theory dump in all the code, but in this instance our code for handling the result that comes back is a little bit bigger, so it kind of makes it a little bit easier to manage and reuse if necessary, to place it inside a separate function. So you can see here, I just change my color there again. So what we're doing is when we return back, and you notice there the word there it is, we're saying start activity for result because we want to come back here, and this time we're going to manage and deal with that URI from the image that the user has selected, update our placemark image property with the URI, and then use Picasso to load up that particular image. Excuse me. So back when we click that button, which is up here, we kick off and call that show image picker, and again that's inside the that helpers package, or what I think I mentioned that in the video as well. So if we just go back to that, here we are over here. So here's our helpers package. So inside image helpers, you can see here we are using one of those action intents that we talked about that's tied to the SAF. So we want to open a particular document, and we want to kind of filter just images. We want to display and create a specific type of intent, creating that chooser that developed displaying that UI, and then there's our activity result launcher object that we passed in, the reference takes an intent, So there's our intent launcher.launch, and then there's the intent to actually kick off that UI. So when the user then, back to show that in operation, back in our app, when the user clicks add image, there it displays it. And here you can see here, because I've logged in, because I'm doing some testing on other apps that would have Google authentication, you can see we have, if we want it, we can go to my own Google Drive, or other users. Google, these are different accounts on this particular device, okay? And just to prove I can pick any image, click on your man, there it goes, okay? Maybe not a great place to visit, but there you go. And again, just for showing our cancel works, we cancel, we're taken back, nothing happens, okay? I think that's more or less it within the application itself. I suppose just have a quick look at the model again, just to show you. So it's in our placemark model where we're adding in. So now we have our ID, title, description, and we have that image URI, which initially we set to kind of an empty string, so to speak, but it's a URI, so we use the URI object, the property.empty, and then we set that back in the when the callback returns back in our placemark activity, and update the model like so. Okay. Again, look, if you have any questions, any issues during the lab, I'll be online for the labs, and again, anything outside of those times, you can get me on Slack or over email. Okay, so thanks for listening, and goodbye.